Susan McKay, and I'm the current president of the Parents Club. And this is Nancy Franich, who was a former president of the Parents Club. And the year is 2023-2024. It happens to be a very special year in the club because this year is our 100th year birthday. Yes, the club is 100 years old, and we're going to be celebrating our centennial all year. And Nancy and I thought it would be fun, in honor of this great important year of the club, for us to go back and look through the archives and see how has the club changed and evolved over the past 100 years. So Nancy and a team of former presidents and other club leaders went back into the Hoover libraries and dug up all the archives and did all this great research. And now we're going to be able to sort of tell you what it was, the story of the Parents Club. So to kick it off, going back to 1923, Ramona, can you tell us what was happening in 1923?
A group of 18 women of the Stanford community were called together by the president of the 6th District of the California Congress of Parents and Teachers to consider a plan for a mother's club at Stanford. The objective of the club was to work with the university in providing assistance for students with financial needs or social needs. Giving scholarship loans was discussed at the very first meeting, and at that meeting they were able to collect $114. Of that, $80 was given to the first scholarship. Now you have to keep in mind, in those days, a Model T cost $250, so this was a very good start.
But scholarships weren't the only projects needing funding.
No?
Let's hear what else there was.
Great.
In the early years of the club, members did fundraising for 3 purposes: scholarships, rest homes, and student welfare. In the 1930s, scholarships were typically $20 to $50 to help cover those costs for lab fees, tuitions, or other costs that may have been outside their budgets. Most of the funds were raised at huge events in the fall and spring at private homes and on campus. Memorable events were hosted by President and Mrs. Hoover and James Stanford's brother, Charles Lathrop. These events were very large. One event had over 1,200 people. A funny incident happened at that event where students helping park cars were attacked by a bull. They had to call in the local fire department to help shoo it away from the students.
So money was raised for scholarships, rest homes, and welfare. Interesting. Can you tell us about the rest homes?
Yes, the rest homes were one of the first and longest objectives of the Mothers Club. The mothers were very concerned about students who had been ill or had surgeries, and they needed a place to convalesce, a place with peace and quiet and proper nutritious food, as they put it. And they provided housing in private homes for these students, starting back in 1928. By the mid-30s, the rest homes were taking care of up to about 800 students.
800 students? Were the mothers paid for this kind of care?
They were. They were paid $1 a day by the students and $2 a day by the Mothers Club.
So we needed funds for scholarships to take care of students who were ill. And then another need came up that required our time and our money.
What was it?
Let's hear.
In the 1930s, the needs of the students really swelled because of the Depression.
The stock market collapse of 1929 and the Great Depression that followed hit the university and students as hard as it did the rest of the country. The club was only 5 years old at the time, but all the members sprang into action. The Welfare Committee saw a huge increase in requests from students for help buying clothing, textbooks, and help in finding jobs. Despite the hard times, or maybe even because of the hard times, the chrysanthemum tea was more popular than ever. This was the major fundraiser for the club, and it provided a distraction for people. People also realized the club needed funds more than ever. For the 1933 tea, the club advertised that they were going to keep the ticket price the same as the previous year, $1. Club members and students modeled fashions from the 1890s, pre-World War I, uniforms that Stanford women who served in World War I wore, and of course, modern fashions of the time. The Glee Club sang songs such as Little Robley Maid and We Won with Jimmy Lonergan. Sadly, I have not been able to find any of the lyrics to those songs. What best sums up the impact of the Mothers Club during the Depression era is this quote from the 1935 edition of the Quad. Many a degree might have been forfeited to the exigencies of these times of depression had not the Mothers Club come forward with the money needed to keep those students in college. Sometimes it is merely the difference those lab fees make, or one in need of a third meal for a student trying to keep going on too low a subsistence budget. Sometimes it is an overcoat that is needed, or clean slacks for hardworking hashers. Perhaps a dentist bill has come unexpectedly, or new glasses are suddenly needed. Whatever the need, great or small, it can usually be met from the generous coffers of the Mothers Club.
And other national events influence the Mothers Club's activities.
In the early 1940s, the U.S. was concerned about the war in Europe. The Mothers Club heard Chancellor Ray Lyman Wilbur speak about getting students ready for war, soundly trained in chemistry, biology, and engineering. Other speakers talked about the ROTC program, about education for the national defense industry, and U.S. foreign policy. The upcoming war aside, the Mothers Club needed money to support their scholarships and their rest homes. The Golden Jubilee Tea was held at the home of Mrs. Charles Gardner Lathrop, where fortune tellers, handwriting experts, and palm readers roamed through the gardens. Mrs. Lathrop's granddaughter wore clothes that had belonged to Jane Stanford. This event raised a whopping $1,500, which was a lot in those days. The 1943 fundraising turned to a phantom tea for a completely make-believe event where individuals paid $1 to not get dressed up or attend. Gas rationing made getting together difficult, and many members were active in the Stanford Volunteer Corps, rolling bandages and packaging nutritional foods for emergencies. Records show that $1,300 was raised by this first non-event.
Aaron, after World War II, a lot of young undergraduate men started at Stanford or came back to Stanford to finish their degrees. How did the Mothers Club help them at that point in time?
Well, this brought a whole new population and a whole new set of needs to the Mothers Club. The men came back and they were married, and some had children. So the married students were put in an area called the Stanford Village, and the minutes indicate that a fund was created in case the wife needed an operation, the stork came, or the baby was sick.
Throughout these turbulent times, the Mothers Club mission continued the same, providing clothing, giving tuition assistance and financial grants to student emergencies, and caring for students in their rest homes. And time moves on, and so did the Mothers Club. Shall we see what happens next?
I can't wait.
At the dawn of the 1960s, the Mothers Club was moving to the beat of a new song, "The Times They Are A-Changing." Many events began including fathers and other relatives. The 35th Chrysanthemum Tea was held on a Sunday afternoon in 1964, and many men were in attendance according to club records. In the late 50s and early 60s, many professors came to the club speaking about the benefits of students traveling abroad at Stanford's emerging European campuses. This led to a lot of interest among parents, and so the club developed several trips to Europe for both moms and dads. These trips, which included a month-long bus tour of Europe, were available for only $1,200. For students, the club initiated gatherings at Stanford's Bechtel International Center. This consisted of 15 American students and 15 international students who met for informal discussions over a lunch catered by local members. These cooks had a budget of $24 from the club, quite a bargain even in those days. By the end of the 80s, the Mothers Club had annual income of $70,000 and a money market fund. By the 1990s, the club had enough funds to create an endowed scholarship managed by the university. This has grown so that today we have offered 2 full-time scholarships from this fund that are given to deserving students who are selected by Stanford's financial aid department.
So many changes, but yet so many things stayed the same.
The Stanford Parents Club goes way beyond supporting students.
From its very beginning, the Mothers Club, as it was then called, invited Stanford students, professors, and staff in their meetings to talk about activities on campus and about the issues of the times. And this is one of the oldest and most cherished traditions of the club. The interesting thing, though, is that the topics that were relevant in the 1950s, many of them are still relevant today. Even at that time, back then, parents were concerned about their students' welfare, their well-being on campus, health and activities. And even today, parents around the club talk about very much the same things. In the 1960s, the club heard about plans for the new Cowell Infirmary on campus from football coach John Ralston on the place of athletics at Stanford. Now here's an interesting one. In 1969, Dennis Hayes, who was the president of the student body, spoke to parents about having a bigger say in the university's decision-making process. And the local papers reported, and I quote, "He spoke to a hostile audience, though two mothers voiced support."
The speaker series remained a constant throughout our 100 years. But the ways we raised funds for our activities took many different directions.
In the second half of the club's life, new ways of raising funds were developed primarily for the scholarship fund. Members had long prepared food for their events, and many shared recipes led to the publication of a cookbook. The 1969 Easy Gourmet at Stanford cookbook sold over 3,000 copies at $2.75 each. In 1999, Fresh Off the Farm celebrated 75 years of Mothers Club service. In 2005, What's Cooking at Stanford was a very popular cookbook because it actually included recipes from Condoleezza Rice and George Shultz. In the 1990s, the club offered a cake delivery service. Over the next 25 years, it grew into a small business. Members enjoyed delivering cakes, balloons, and flowers and interacting with the students. Another fundraiser was Mother's Day cards, designed by Parent Club members, featuring scenes from Stanford. Included was a Polaroid photo of the student who had added his or her personalized notes and drawings. Well, Mary, tell me a little bit more about the Apricot Jam Project. How did this get started?
Well, in the early 1970s, Nancy, David Packard donated at least 4 lugs of apricots to the Parents Club to make apricot jam. So this continued, and still today, every summer when the apricots are ripe, we pick them up, we make jam. It was such a good way to meet new members of the club. Throughout the years, boutiques also made money for the Parents Club. Items were donated from members all over the country. Things like gourmet foods, handmade crafts, jewelry. Stanford items with logos also became popular. The best part of all these projects was knowing that we could have a more personal connection with Stanford and the student.
And now we come to the modern times, the years from 2000 on. And what's interesting when you look back over the 100-year history of our club is that although many things evolved over time, some things never changed. Number one is the founding principles never changed. What is it that we do as a club? The same things, the same mission, the same principles drive what we do. We welcome new families to campus, helping Stanford to do that. We engage parents through social and intellectual activities. And we help Stanford support students through special programs that we do in collaboration with Stanford and through scholarships, which have been a very important part of our club for the entire 100 years. So one of the things about the Parents Club is that we evolve with the times. The things that we do really reflect what are the volunteer interests of our parents. If we have a volunteer who wants to get involved and lead something and make it happen, we welcome that kind of participation in our club. And that's how we get things done, and that's how our club evolves. And hopefully, that's how it will continue to evolve for the next 100 years.
So, we hope so.
We hope so, and happy birthday, Parents Club, and thank you for watching.